We're in the book of Psalms. We have reached Psalm 25. A little bit longer one after the last couple, but we will read through it. We will do our best to talk about it, and if we only get part way, that'll be all right. If you do have thoughts, because I know everyone read ahead and is all prepared. It's exactly what I used to do when I was sitting out there instead of standing up here. Be sure to make sure that you hold that in mind, and we can talk about stuff right at the end, even if we didn't have a chance to get all the way to say verse 20 or something like that. So, but before we begin, we'll pause here. We'll have a word of prayer, and then we'll get started. Oh, I didn't get my remote. I'm gonna have to go get that too. But we'll pray first. All right. Father in heaven, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this world that you have made. We are grateful to you, Father, for the time that we have, the opportunities that we have to study from your word, to think about what it says, and to contemplate how we can lead lives that become more closely in accordance with what your word says, that we can do the things that bring you the glory and honor that belong to you. Father, we are thankful for what you have done. We are thankful for all the things that you will do. But we are most thankful that you sent your son, Jesus, that he was a sacrifice to redeem us. And we pray these things in his name. All right. Thank you, sir, very much. And we'll get reading. Psalm 25, a psalm of David. Unto you, O Yahweh, do I lift up my soul. O my God, in you have I trusted. Let me not be put to shame. Let not my enemies triumph over me. Yea, let none who wait for you be put to shame. Let them be put to shame who are treacherous without cause. Show me your ways, O Yahweh. Teach me your paths. Guide me in your truth and teach me, for you are the God of my salvation. For you do I wait all the day. Remember your mercies, O Yahweh, and your loving kindness, for they are of old. The sins of my youth and my transgressions remember not. According to your loving kindness, remember me for the sake of your goodness, O Yahweh. Good and upright is Yahweh, therefore he will instruct sinners in the way. The meek he will guide in justice, and the meek he will teach his way. All the paths of Yahweh are loving kindness and truth to such as keep his covenant and his testimonies. For your name's sake, O Yahweh, pardon my iniquity, for it is great. What man is he who fears Yahweh? Him shall he instruct in the way that he shall choose. His soul shall dwell at ease, and his seed shall inherit the land. The friendship of Yahweh is with those who fear him, and he will show them his covenant. My eyes are ever toward Yahweh, for he will pluck my feet out of the net. Turn to me and be gracious to me, for I am desolate and afflicted. The troubles of my heart are enlarged. Bring me out of my distresses. Consider my affliction and my travail, and forgive all my sins. Consider my enemies, for they are many, and they hate me with cruel hatred. Keep my soul and deliver me. Let me not be put to shame, for I take refuge in you. Let integrity and uprightness preserve me, for I wait for you. Redeem Israel, O God, out of all his troubles. All right. So before I ask my standard question of what is this psalm about, did anybody recognize any sort of tune or song in this psalm? Yes? Probably if you have the King James Version, it's a little easier to spot, right? Unto you, O Lord, do I lift up my soul. Oh my God, I trust in you. Let me not be ashamed, and let not my enemies triumph over me. We sing that song. We've sung that song, probably most of us. Yeah. So this is one of those psalms where the King James has several verses that are lifted directly into a song that is familiar, at least I think, with most people in the Church of Christ, at least in the areas that I've lived and grown up. So I love running across these things. This is one of my favorite things to find and to read. So the psalm as well, again, before we talk about it, is an acrostic. Each verse beginning with a different letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Sort of. Most people probably have footnotes, if you have a Bible with footnotes, that says something like this. Right? For example, my NIV study Bible here says, this psalm is an acrostic poem, the verses of which begin with successive letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Now that is pretty true, but to really make that work, you kind of have to rearrange verse 2 a little bit. Otherwise, it starts with the same letter as verse 1. There's actually a letter missing. They didn't use them all. 19 is repeating 18's letter, and the extra verse at the end doesn't fit the pattern. So this may have been changed a little over the years in terms of order, and particularly if we get this far, the verse at the end may have been added on by someone subsequent to the original author. And again, if we get that far, we can talk about it, or you can bug me about it later, but we'll see if we can get to that. So it's mostly an acrostic. But again, if you really look at what we have, for example, in the Hebrew text, it's not quite all there. Is that a problem? I'm getting a few shaking heads. No, I don't think so either. It certainly has a form, a poetic form that was popular, apparently, as one of the ways that Jewish people, Israelites, would write poetry or songs. We talked again, we talked before, we'll talk now, we'll talk in another class, I'm sure, that they did not do their poetic form the way that we do. The way we like in English to have rhymes at the ends of lines, or at a consistent place in the line. Maybe not at the end, but we'll put the rhyme in the middle. We like rhyming. They liked other kinds of things, as other cultures have done, other languages. They were much fonder of alliteration in their poetic forms than we are, though we do some of that. And they also liked things like acrostics, and they would have these parallelisms. The verses themselves would contain thoughts that were either incomplete without both lines, or that would have repetitions and so forth between one line and the other. They would have the idea run forwards, and then the second line would run the same idea but reverse the order. Things like that were more popular, more preferred in their poetic mode. And some of that gets obscured, again, in translation, and because we don't tend to look for that, because that's not how we tend to do poetry. So, again, the fact that the acrostic is not all there, again, maybe they just liked starting lines with successive letters, and they didn't always feel the need to use them all. So, different things. But, what is this psalm about? Self-deprecation, praise to God. You were going to...
I'll tell you what, from the beginning of Psalm 1 to here, for me, this is one of the finest of all so far.
Okay.
It describes a man's journey through life in a way, and all the importance of knowing God, and it illustrates that you can go to God and ask for forgiveness, you can have Him guide you, you can trust in Him. It kind of hits all the bases as far as I'm concerned.
Right, and that's an excellent point, that this psalm can be difficult to categorize because it encompasses a number of different styles. It is not purely a lament. It is not purely praise of God. It is not purely about the wisdom of God and learning from Him. It encompasses a lot of different elements that apply to a lot of different parts of our lives. Yes, sir?
In my Bible, it says, a prayer for defense, guidance, and pardon. As we trust in God, He grants us same requests for us.
Yeah, it talks about all those different things, right? It is a prayer for God to both to defend us, to protect us, to forgive us, but also to grant us wisdom, to be able to help us know and understand what it is that we ought to do, how we ought to live. It contains praise for God. The very last verse, again, talks about Israel corporately, rather than an individual person saying the prayer or singing the song. So it really runs a wide spectrum of different topics and different kinds of elements, which make it, again, difficult to just pigeonhole into a single box of this is a song of lament, this is a song of praise. It kind of broadens and covers a lot of different things. He's lamenting sinfulness and pleading for salvation, as well as, again, talking about the ways in which God guides and leads and directs us and so forth. So there is quite a lot here. In the first verse, the word order is actually a very deliberate choice. I'm relying on other people's scholarship, since I do not read Hebrew. But apparently the word for lift, right, unto you, O Yahweh, do I lift up my soul. The verb here uses the same letter as unto. speaking to God. And so it appears to be a deliberate choice, one of those times where we can see that this was done specifically in this order for a specific reason. Because you could easily turn this verse around and start it a different way, with a different way, by saying, I'm lifting up my soul to you, O God. Instead, starting with God, and then again in the second line, oh my God, in you I have trusted. Starting both of those lines the same way by putting God in the very first part of the line. Again, one of those rare instances where you can kind of see that because of the way that the psalm is structured. They were deliberately using that letter to start the line, and they had two choices, the author did. Shame in verse 2 is interesting. Let me not be put to shame. The literal meaning of the word is to be ruined. Let me not be ruined or destroyed, O God. And the shame is necessarily an implication of that word. Why would we infer shame from destruction?
Shame is more personal, it's more intimate to me.
Okay, it's a much more personal kind of idea. I suppose so, yeah. Why else would we associate, or would the author associate shame with ruin and destruction?
I think of shame as more a result of your own doing.
Okay,
You usually don't feel shame because someone does something to you. You feel shame because you did something yourself.
okay. Tying with the idea of guilt, right? The idea that I have done something wrong and of which I am ashamed. Okay, yeah. It's personal in that way as well, that it is my own fault. But why would shame in this context, again, he's talking about trusting in God, lifting up his soul to God, and then saying, do not let me be destroyed. Let that not be a shame for me. It's part of the plea. It's part of the appeal to God that if, God, you are to allow my destruction, it will be shameful for me to have put my trust in you and then had that happen. That I will be ashamed of having trusted in this foolishness. Right? That there was no God to save me. Right? It is part of this appeal that God will not allow that to happen to his people or to his follower. Let not my destruction bring shame. This is a word or a concept that gets returned to later on in the psalm as well. It's a theme that is brought back near the close of the psalm. I should really keep moving quickly. The requests here, too, in the first couple verses, speaking of trusting in God, asking for these things, is immediately pivots to confidence in verse 3. Saying that people who trust in him will not be put to shame. But, oh, yes, sir.
End of verse 2, exalt. I know exalt, but what is exalt?
Exult, I think this has come up before. The word in the King James is triumph. And this is I think of the guy doing in football, he does the end zone dance in front of the defensive back who's still lying on the ground, right? This is exulting, right? It's an in-your-face kind of victory celebration, right? I have won, but just as importantly, you have lost, right? That's the exulting that he is wanting to not happen, right? Like, don't let my enemy have this moment of triumph and celebration in the face of what I have been doing or proclaiming or trying to accomplish. Yeah. So he moves from that request to confidence that he is going to be saved, and that he is going to be kept from being put to shame, and that in fact being put to shame will be his enemies, rather. That those who oppose him will suffer that which he is appealing not to suffer himself. But that last line in 3, who are treacherous without excuse or without cause. Is there a reason or a cause for treachery? What justifies being treacherous?
Treacherous towards the ways of the Lord.
Yeah, I mean,
Against the ways of Him.
I don't think I quite grasp what you're saying. I'm sorry.
So it says, will be put to shame, but shame will come on those who are treacherous without cause.
Mhm.
So, treacherous towards His teaching, towards the Lord's teachings.
Yes, someone who is treacherous towards, again, if this is David writing or speaking, treacherous towards him, or again, towards the people of God generally. But what reason could they have, right? Saying treacherous without cause appears to imply that they could be treacherous with a cause, right? That they have a reason for their treachery, their betrayal.
Usually it's selfishness.
Okay,
I will gain power if such and such happens.
a base motive, but a motive, right? The idea that I will triumph in some way, get something that I don't deserve through this sneaky treachery, but then I will have it at least. Yeah.
Basically living to be treacherous, living not of the Lord's ways, but living against those ways.
Yeah, and I think that that's what he's getting at here, is that they do it even when there is nothing to gain, right? That there are people, oh, go ahead.
No, because they believe more in the worldly ways instead of His ways. That's what they
Yes,
live for.
yes, that they do these worldly things, but even then, they have no excuse. However poor, they still do it without any excuse. Because I watch a lot of movies, you remember one of the Batman movies, right, where Alfred is telling Batman about why the Joker is the way he is? Some men just want to see the world burn, right? He's not doing this to gain something. He's not doing this because there's a reason that he's trying to do it for, or a goal that he's trying to accomplish. He's just bad. He has chosen to be a force of chaos and destruction and evil. And this is, I think, who the psalmist is kind of speaking of, right? Those who are treacherous without any excuse at all. They just do it to do it. Yeah.
So like no malice at all.
Well, malice, but without an object. Again, this can be a difficult concept for people to grasp and understand, because we are so used, and indeed we ought to be, people that are driven by good motivations, right? That I want to please God. I want to do what's right. I seek truth and I do good things, both because they're right to do, but also I enjoy doing them for others. And that when we fail to do that, right, we have justifications frequently for ourselves. I told that lie to them because I didn't want to hurt their feelings, right? That's my reason. I stole that because I really needed it and I couldn't afford it, and it's something that's necessary for me, right? I had to hit him. Did you hear what he said about my mother? I couldn't not do it. I had a reason. But there are people that will do things just to do them. And it can be difficult sometimes to comprehend that kind of evil. There are people out there that are terrible people, and you go, why did you do that? And they don't really have a good reason. I don't know. Seemed like a good idea at the time.
Sounds like our toddlers.
And toddlers can indeed be this way. Sometimes, sure. They have the virtue of innocence and not understanding, I think, some of the rights and wrongs of things.
But you're describing two different, where I feel like there's a third.
Okay,
So you have the I'm bad, and I'm really bad.
sure.
And then there's I'm bad because I felt justified in it. And then there's I had to do this
Mhm.
to preserve something good.
Sure.
So
I think
they're
that
not being,
I think those latter two are much closer than we realize, or sometimes that we even want to admit to ourselves. Right? The New Testament tells us that doing evil in order that good may result is still verboten. Right? That's forbidden. We may not do a thing that is wrong in order to try and accomplish a good end,
But don't we see examples of that in the Bible?
such as,
That you would do that.
of course I would do that.
Oh, my word, I can't come up with.
And that's okay. I'm not going to put you on the spot.
Deny Jesus, when he denied Jesus 3 times.
Okay.
Well, that was selfish. I'm talking about more like where deceit was allowed or even helped.
Okay, like
In
Rahab
order-
and
In order
Jericho.
to help somebody get away from danger.
Sure. Rahab and Jericho, the spies that she lies about and releases. Or
The Hebrew midwives when they were in Egypt.
Hebrew midwives lying about what kinds of children were being born. Sure. Okay.
I seem to recall some story about a farmer and his field, and that he should allow people to take a certain amount, that's stealing, but that's all right.
Yeah, that was ensconced into the Hebraic law that you would not, you're supposed to leave the corners and the edges for people to just go ahead and glean from who did not have their own fields. A little different, but I understand where you're going with that. Yeah. What I would say in each of these examples is they were still wrong. They were still wrong. Do we believe or do we not that God cannot be thwarted in his purposes? I know that that is easy for me to stand up here behind this little lectern and say, and I fully admit that I am guilty in my own life of not always believing that and acting on it in the way that I'm saying right now. I am a flawed and imperfect person. But as a principle, I don't think that you can really argue with that. The Hebrew midwives thought that they needed to lie in order to preserve those children. Could God not have saved them otherwise? Do we really believe that God was impotent to the degree that he required their lies to accomplish his ends? Or Rahab, releasing the spies from Jericho by lying about where they were? Do we really believe that God could not have defended them had she been honest and forthright and truthful? It is difficult for us to do. It is difficult for us to believe the words in Romans that says that God can turn all things to the ends, to the proper end, right? The good of those who love and serve him, right? That's what it says, that he can do it. But we don't always act like we believe it. We want to give it a boost. We want to give it a little bit of help. I need to tell this little white lie in order to make things go more smoothly. The truth will not serve here. Really? Come on in. Am I really that behind? No, I've still got time. Okay. But you can be in the class too. Feel free. My point is, and we're really not going to get through the song at this point, but is that we will often think that we need to do something because there is no other choice. But there's always another choice. We can do the thing that we know is right, that we see no way out of, and we can accept the consequences that come with it.
I think that's one of our struggles as being a Christian.
It is a huge struggle for being a Christian. So the problem is that if we get into that wrong way of thinking now with these little things, when someone comes to you and puts a gun to your head and says that you may live if you will deny the Christ, if you have made a practice of compromising because you think it's okay to make these little compromises, to smooth things over, to make it easier as it gets along, when the rubber really meets the road, how easy is it going to be to make that decision? I pray to God that none of us in here ever have to make that decision, or anybody that ever hears my recorded words. But a lot of Christians do. A lot of them when they don't expect it. Frequently it is a surprise. People get hauled out of beds in the middle of the night. They get surprised in the places they find themselves living and working and playing and going to school. And if you have not made a commitment ahead of time, it is far easier to falter in the moment of truth. Yeah. Doing wrong that right may come is never okay. Never. Yeah.
That gets really complicated because if I'm not responsible for the well-being of other people, somebody puts a gun in my head, okay, it's my life, should be. But if I'm dead and the people that are relying on me be taken care of, then I should have faith that God's going to take care of all of them and I'm not really needed.
And this is the truth of all of our lives that is difficult for us to accept, is that God requires none of us. He does not need us. He loves us. He wants us to be in relationship with him. He wants us to be with him for eternity. He wants us to enjoy the good things that he has prepared. But he doesn't need us. We are not necessary.
Not the heroes of the story.
Yeah, I guess you could say it that way. We're not the protagonist of the story, in a sense. Yeah. All right, verse 3, and it's, all right. I apologize. After the expectation in verse 3, with 4 returns to petition, but it is a different petition now. He is no longer asking for salvation or rescue. What is he asking for in 4?
Guidance.
Guidance. What else? Guidance, truth, knowledge and wisdom as well, yeah. Not just simply being told where to go, but understanding as well. Show me your ways, Lord, teach me your paths, guide me in your truth and teach me. He is asking God for the wisdom and knowledge to be able to follow God closely. This is one of those things that I try, and I probably fail more often than I would like, but I try to remember this as being an important and integral part of prayer, right? That we are needing to know the will of God so that we can obey and follow the will of God. That this is the advanced elements of our faith, right? That to know the right from the wrong, as the writer of Hebrews tells us, is the advanced things of the faith. It is the meat of it rather than the milk of the basic theology. So this prayer to God for this wisdom and understanding what his paths are and the ways that we should go should be an important element in the ways that we ask and talk to God for what we need and require. Because finding and knowing what God's path is can be very difficult. Right? This relates to what we were just talking about, right? That there are times frequently where we do not see the way forward. We don't understand how God is going to work this situation out. What is my path forward from here? This is apparently my time to have this emphasized in my life, right? My job is going away, and let me tell you, it can be a real slog trying to find another one. You get a lot of people telling you like, you're not that great. We don't need you here. Now they say it more politely, but that's the way it feels. You get a lot of that. You're like, oh, I don't know. Like, what am I going to do? Well, there is a need to depend on God and to continue to ask, what is it that I should be doing? Help me understand where to go from here, God. Keith, you're going to.
Sometimes it's not always that. Sometimes you're not going to have all the answers. That's where the faith part of it comes in. You got to just, God's not necessarily going to connect all the dots for you.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you have to have faith in.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes we.
Also, it's up to you to stay in the Word, too. It's not always up to God. It's up to you to be diligent and study the Bible, too, in the Word. So part of it's up to you, too.
We do need to be diligent to do the things that we know we ought to do, even when we don't see how that will work out. Yeah.
Sometimes you're not going to have all the answers.
Yeah. Frequently, we will not have all the answers. Even when we think we have an answer, sometimes we don't have the answer.
I guess I'd say this God may not give you all the answers, too. It's up to you to trust Him.
This is
That's where a lot of people fall short, I think. They expect God to give them all the answers, and that's not necessarily going to happen.
Well, and yes, and an important element of that is as well that even if we have the answers, we don't always comprehend how that works, right? The mind of God is above ours to the degree that even knowing what he knows does not necessarily help us understand what he understands. You see this with the disciples to a degree in the New Testament. Jesus tells them, the Son of Man has come in order to die and then be raised. And they were like, wait, what? Huh? What are you talking about? They didn't get it. They couldn't, even when they were told, this is what's going to happen, they still didn't understand what that meant. Right? You can get an answer and not even comprehend your answer. God's ways are not ours, and expecting to always understand them is rude. But it is incumbent on us, yes, to do what we can to understand and to see that path forward by petitioning God for that help and that guidance. All right, I don't know if there was another one of these notes that I really wanted to get to, but I'm going to stop here for a moment. Was there something ahead that anybody wanted to talk about particularly? Because this is the big chance. I got 5 minutes or so left. What should we jump ahead to? Anybody have anything? Because I got a lot more that I can go through, but I want to. Yes, sir.
Yeah, verse 7 always got me.
Verse 7.
I'm asking God to forget something, completely forget something.
Mm-hmm.
People can't do that. If they get hurt by something, they will hold that memory forever and ever.
It enters into the idea of a paradox a little bit too, right? Could God make a rock so big he couldn't lift it? Could an all-knowing God actually forget something and still be all-knowing, right? The paradoxical nature of the request is a little interesting and odd. But again, in this particular context, I think the remembering or the not remembering, it falls into the idea of simply having it not be applicable, not being applied, not being brought up, not being used in a sense, right? That, again, to use perhaps a poor metaphor, right, from sports, that you can have a penalty on playing football, but you can decline that penalty, right? You can just forget about it, right? Oh, there was pass interference. Well, we still got a touchdown, so you can just forget about it. Just forget about it. And everything carries on as if it had not happened. It doesn't mean that the knowledge is actually literally gone. In the same way that God, I don't think, ceases to know every element, aspect of our lives and actions. But it doesn't matter.
It's like having a court record sealed but not destroyed.
Yes. There's probably not a perfect metaphor for this because we can't actually do as God does. But something like that, yes, sealing a court record but not actually destroying it, something.
But there's the other verse somewhere that talks about that once we're clean, that our sin is wiped away.
Mm-hmm.
Because he couldn't look upon us with the sin. So, and I can't remember the verse, but it reminds me, or it leads you to think that he no longer, and I think it says he no longer remembers the sin.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I think this gets into, again, the element of, do we really understand how the mind of God works? And I don't think we do. I mean, it's clear that we don't. Does God cease to be omniscient? I would say no. No, he doesn't. He still knows everything that there is to know. But does God remember that sin of ours when he is dealing with us? I would also say no. No, God does not. How exactly does that work, right? I don't know. But I'm confident that both of those things are true. Now, I may use, football metaphors or whatever it is in order to try and give us some glimmer of understanding of how God works, what he is doing, without really understanding how. But even then, those fail. These are not ways that we can really explain God. Again, he is sui generis, right? He is without any sort of comparison. There's no one else at all like him. He is completely alone. In the same way that the Trinity is not really fully comprehensible by us. Why? We can't draw an analogy to anything else because there is nothing else like it. We think that we can draw these analogies, but we end up usually falling into some sort of heretical notion when we do. But God is he's God. And so sometimes we're like, well, I don't exactly know, but he said it, and he doesn't lie. So, yeah.
What
Well, again, this gets into the theology of salvation with Christ, that our sins are indeed paid for, right? The blood of Christ pays for those sins. The sins themselves have been punished. But the punishment does not fall on us. Punishment fell on Christ in his sacrifice and his shedding of his blood in order to pay for the sins that we had done. All right, I'm out of time. Any final thoughts, questions? I apologize. 4 verses. This is a return to form for me. Yeah.
Just want to make sure, we can be forgiven, but sometimes we still have to suffer the consequences of our sins. So
Temporally, yes.
just like Apostle Paul.
Temporally. We do have to suffer consequence for sin in this life sometimes.
Not always, but just, it's possible.
Sure. That there is due punishment in a worldly sense for committing crimes, even if God has forgiven you. Yes, that is certainly true. All right, well, hopefully Psalm 26, it's a little shorter. Maybe we can do more than 4 verses of it, but I appreciate everybody's time, appreciate your attention. We'll talk some more next week. Thank you.